Why won't OS install from USB drive? Imagine trying to start a new adventure but hitting a wall right away. That's what happens when your operating system refuses to install from a USB drive. It can be frustrating, but let's look at what might be causing the issue and how to fix it. First, the USB drive needs to be properly prepared as a bootable device. That means the OS installation files must be correctly written onto the USB in a format the computer can recognize and boot from. If the USB isn't formatted with the right file system, like FAT32 or NTFS, or if the bootable image was not created correctly, the computer won't start the installation process. Sometimes, the process of making the USB bootable gets corrupted or incomplete, so it's good to double-check that the creation process finished successfully. Next, the computer's firmware settings, either BIOS or UEFI, need to be configured to boot from the USB. During startup, you have to enter the firmware setup and set the USB drive as the first boot device. If you forget this step or don't save the changes, the system will ignore the USB and try to boot from the usual hard drive or other devices. Modern computers often use UEFI firmware with Secure Boot enabled. Secure Boot is a security feature that only allows trusted software to run during startup. If the OS installer on the USB isn't signed or compatible with Secure Boot, the system will block it. Disabling Secure Boot and switching to Legacy Boot or Compatibility Support Module mode can often resolve this problem. USB port compatibility can also cause issues. Some systems have trouble booting from USB 3.0 ports, especially if the firmware or drivers don't support it properly. Using a USB 2.0 port instead can help. Also, check that the USB ports are enabled in the firmware and functioning correctly. Sometimes, the ports or their drivers get disabled or malfunction, preventing the system from detecting the USB drive. Hardware requirements like Trusted Platform Module or RAM checks can block installation if the system detects incompatible hardware. For example, some OS installers check for a certain amount of RAM or a specific hardware module. If these checks fail, the installation won't proceed. Bypassing these checks might involve changing settings in the installer or using special boot options. Different operating systems have different interactions with hardware and firmware. Windows often requires specific UEFI settings and secure boot adjustments. Linux distributions tend to be more flexible with boot modes. MacOS installations are different altogether, needing Apple hardware and specific recovery procedures. To fix these issues, start by making sure the USB is created correctly with a reliable tool. Test the USB on another computer to confirm it works. Enter the firmware setup and set the USB as the primary boot device. Disable Secure Boot and enable Legacy Boot if needed. Use a USB 2.0 port instead of USB 3.0 if problems persist. Check that the USB ports are enabled and working. And if hardware checks are involved, review the system's hardware compatibility and adjust settings accordingly. Following these steps can help you troubleshoot why your OS won't install from a USB drive. It's all about making sure the USB is prepared properly, the firmware is set up correctly, and hardware is compatible. Once these are in place, the installation process should go smoothly.